Serafina Duskmore had been sold 3 times before she turned 21, but it was the fourth sale that would teach her the difference between a price and a value. The dusty main street of Copper Ridge stretched before her like a scar across. The desert floor, all adobe walls, and weathered wood that had given up trying to keep out the wind. She stepped down from the creaking stagecoach, her worn boots meeting earth that hadn't seen rain in near 6 months. The driver handed down her single carpet bag. Everything she owned in this world fit in a space smaller than a feed sack. "That'll be him," the driver said, nodding toward a figure leaning against the porch post of what might generously be called the town's mercantile. Talon Greaves. Quiet as a grave, that one. Serafina studied her husband-to-be from across the street. He was tall and lean as a fence post, with shoulders that spoke of honest work and hands that hung still at his sides. His hat was pulled low, casting shadows across features she couldn't quite make out, but there was something in his posture, a kind of patient stillness that reminded her of the oak trees back home, the ones that bent with storms but never broke. He didn't move toward her, didn't even straighten, just watched as she gathered her skirts and crossed the street, her heels clicking against the wooden planks of the sidewalk. "Miss Duskmore," he said when she reached him. His voice was quiet, rough-edged, like river stones. "I'm Talon." She inclined her head. "Mr. Greaves." They stood there in the afternoon heat, two strangers bound by a contract neither had written. Serafina knew what he saw when he looked at her, a woman past her prime at 21, with calloused hands and a face that had forgotten how to smile easily. What he didn't know was that she'd been sold the first time at 14 to pay her father's gambling debts, the second time at 17 to settle a dispute over stolen horses, and the third time at 19 to cover her late husband's funeral expenses. Each sale had carved something from her, the way wind carves stone. "Your letter said you needed a wife," she said, breaking the silence that stretched between them like a held breath. "I did." He shifted his weight, and she caught a glimpse of eyes the color of storm clouds. "Still do, I reckon. And I need a husband." The words came out steadier than she felt. "Seems we have ourselves an arrangement." He nodded toward a buckboard wagon tied to the hitching post. "Ranch is about an hour's ride. We can talk terms on the way." Terms. As if they were negotiating the price of cattle or the lease on grazing land. Serafina supposed they were, in a way. She'd learned long ago that everything could be reduced to terms. What you gave, what you got, what you could afford to lose. The wagon lurched as they left town behind, wheels finding every rut and stone in the road. Talon kept his eyes on the horses, reins loose in his capable hands. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't the sharp, cutting quiet she'd grown used to. This was different, gentler somehow, like the pause between lightning and thunder. "My first wife died 3 years back," he said suddenly, his voice barely carrying over the creak of the wagon. "Fever took her in the winter. Baby too." Serafina felt something twist in her chest. "I'm sorry." He nodded, still not looking at her. "Ranch has been failing since. Can't manage the house and the land both. Needs a woman's touch." "And what exactly does that mean?" She kept her voice level, but her hands tightened on her carpet bag. "What sort of woman's touch?" Now he did look at her, and she saw something in his eyes that surprised her, a flicker of what might have been shame. "I'm not talking about warming my bed, if that's what you're thinking. I meant cooking, cleaning, tending the garden. Making the place feel like home again instead of just existing." The knot in her chest loosened slightly. "I can do those things. I figured you could." The wagon hit a particularly deep rut, and their shoulders bumped. "Your letter said you'd been married before. Twice." She didn't elaborate. Didn't mention how the first had been a brute who'd used his fists to make his points, or how the second had been kind but weak, drinking himself to death rather than facing the debts that mounted like winter snow. They rode in silence for another mile before Talon spoke again. "I should tell you, the ranch isn't much to look at. House needs repairs, roof leaks in 3 places, and the well's been giving me trouble. Most of the cattle died in the drought last summer." "Sounds like paradise," Serafina said, and was surprised when the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "It's honest work," he said. "Hard but honest. I'll never make you rich, but I'll never sell you neither." The words hit her like a physical blow. She turned to stare at him, but his attention was back on the road ahead. "Never sell you." As if he somehow knew, as if he could see the invisible brands that marked her as merchandise, as something to be traded when times got lean. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why what? Why would you promise such a thing to a woman you've never met? This time he did look at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Because I reckon you've been sold enough times for one lifetime. The wagon crested a small hill, and there it was, the Greaves Ranch spread out below. Them like a promise written in weathered wood and stubborn hope. The house was small but solid, with a wraparound porch that had seen better days. The barn leaned slightly to one side, and she could see places where the fence had been mended with whatever wood was handy. That it wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had in years. Home, Talon said simply to as they rolled down the hill toward her new life. Serafina felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. It whispered through her chest like wind through wheat, fragile and precious as morning dew. But could a woman who'd been sold 4 times ever truly learn to belong somewhere? The house smelled of dust and neglect, with an underlying sweetness that spoke of dried herbs and old memories. Serafina stood in the doorway, taking in the main room with its stone fireplace and furniture draped in white sheets like ghosts waiting to be awakened. Talon set her carpet bag down near the door and pulled off his hat, revealing hair the color of wheat left too long in the field. Kitchen's through there, he said, nodding toward an archway. Bedroom's upstairs, it's yours. I've been sleeping in the barn. The barn. She turned to study his profile. That's not necessary. It is. His voice carried a finality that brooked no argument. This arrangement, it's not about that. Not yet, anyway. Maybe not ever, if you don't want it to be. There it was again, that careful consideration, as if her feelings mattered more than his needs. Serafina didn't know what to do with such gentleness. It felt foreign in her hands, like trying to hold water. She moved through the house slowly, her fingers trailing along furniture that remembered a woman's touch. In the kitchen, she found cast iron pots hung with care, shelves lined with mason, jars that still held the remnants of preserves. A rocking chair sat by the window, positioned to catch the morning light. She liked to sit there, Talon said from behind her. Molly said it was the best spot to watch the sunrise. Serafina's hand stilled on the chair's worn armrest. How long were you married? 5 years. He moved to the window, looking out at the rolling hills beyond. Met her at a church social in town. She was the prettiest thing I'd ever seen, all golden hair and laughter. Couldn't believe she'd have me. The pain in his voice was carefully controlled, like a horse held in check. Serafina understood that kind of restraint, the way you learn to keep hurt locked away where it couldn't be used against you. Tell me about the ranch, she said, steering the conversation towards safer ground. His shoulders relaxed slightly. 200 acres, mostly grazing land. Had near 50 head of cattle before the drought. Down to 12 now, plus a milk cow and some chickens. Grow what vegetables we can in the kitchen garden, but the soil's been stubborn. And the well, drying up. Been having to haul water from the creek most days. He turned from the window. I should warn you, winters here are hard. Snow can pile 6 feet deep, and we might not see another soul for months. Serafina almost smiled. I'm not afraid of hard winters, Mr. Greaves. I'm afraid of summers that never end. He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he could see straight through to the scars on her soul. What happened to your first husband? The question came so quietly she almost missed it. He died, she said simply. How? Someone shot him. The truth slipped out before she could stop it. A man whose daughter he'd hurt. I can't say I was sorry to see him go. Talon's jaw tightened. He hurt you too? She didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. He took a step toward her, then stopped himself, hands clenching at his sides. And the second, drink. She moved away from the rocking chair, unable to bear the weight of kindness in his eyes. He was gentle, but weak. The world broke him piece by piece until there wasn't enough left to keep breathing. I don't drink, Talon said. I know. She'd put that question in her letter, along with others that had made her sound desperate. Don't drink, don't gamble, don't raise your hand to women or children. The basic requirements for a man worth marrying, though she'd learned how rare such creatures were. They worked through the afternoon in comfortable silence, pulling dust covers from furniture and opening windows to let the desert air sweep through. Serafina found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. The careful way he handled things that had belonged to his first wife, the gentle reverence in his touch, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold, she ventured into the kitchen garden. What she found there made her heart clench with unexpected emotion. Someone had tried to keep it going. The rows were laid out with mathematical precision, and she could see where hands had pulled weeds and turned soil. But without a woman's knowledge of what to plant where, when to harvest, how to coax life from reluctant earth, the garden had become a testament to good intentions and poor execution. I tried, Talon said from behind her. Couldn't make much. Grow except the herbs. Molly's lavender keeps coming back every spring, stubborn as she was. Serafina knelt beside a struggling tomato plant, her fingers gentle on its yellowing leaves. It's not about making things grow, she said. It's about understanding what they need. And what do they need? She looked up at him, this quiet man, who'd bought her sight unseen but promised never to sell her. Time. Patience. Someone who pays attention to the signs. That evening, she cooked their first meal together, beans and cornbread with some of the preserved peaches she'd found in the pantry. They ate in relative silence, the only sounds the scrape of spoons against bowls and the distant lowing of cattle. There's something you should know, Talon said as she cleared the dishes. About why I needed a wife so particular. Serafina waited, her hands stilling on the plates. Bank's been sniffing around. Mortgage is 3 months behind, and they're talking about foreclosure. I hoped maybe a woman's touch might help turn things around. Make the place productive again. And if it doesn't, his eyes met hers across the table. Then we'll face whatever comes together. Later, as she lay in the bedroom that still smelled faintly of lavender water and lost dreams, Serafina stared at the ceiling and tried to understand what she'd gotten herself into. Through the window, she could see the barn where Talon had made his bed among the hay and horses. A good man sleeping alone while she occupied the room where his heart had been buried. She thought about the garden, about the way his hands had trembled almost imperceptibly when he'd spoken of his first wife, about the careful distance he maintained, as if he were afraid of wanting too much, too soon. In her experience, men took what they wanted and justified it later. But Talon Greaves seemed to be a different breed altogether, one that asked permission. Even when the law said none was needed, the question was, what did she want? For the first time in years, Serafina allowed herself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she might get to choose. But could a ranch on the edge of ruin really offer salvation? Or was she just trading one kind of desperation for another? 3 weeks into their arrangement, Serafina discovered that Talon Greaves talked to his horses more than he talked to her. As she'd risen before dawn to start the bread, as had become her custom, when she heard his voice drifting from the barn. Not the careful, measured tones he used with her, but something softer, almost musical in its cadence. Curious, she stepped onto the porch, her bare feet silent on the weathered boards. "Know you miss her too, old girl," he was saying to the bay mare. "She used to bring you apples, remember? Sweet as summer rain, she was. Both of you." Serafina's throat tightened. Even in grief, he was gentle. She was about to retreat when a sound made her freeze, the unmistakable rumble of approaching horses. Riders, moving fast and raising dust against the pale morning sky. Her blood turned to ice water. In her experience, men who rode hard at dawn brought nothing but trouble. "Talon," she called, her voice carrying more urgency than she'd intended. He emerged from the barn, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle propped near the door. His eyes found the dust cloud, and his jaw tightened. "Get inside," he said quietly. "Lock the door." "Who?" Now Serafina. The use of her given name, spoken with such quiet authority, sent her moving before she could think to argue. From the kitchen window, she watched as 3 riders approached the house. Even at a distance, she could see they wore the look of men accustomed to taking what they wanted. The leader was a thick-set man with a beard that had gone to gray. He dismounted with the careful movements of someone whose joints had been hardened by years in the saddle. The other 2 stayed mounted, hands resting casually on their gun belts. "Greaves," the bearded man called. "We need to talk." Talon stepped into the yard, his rifle held loose but ready. "Mr. Carlyle, you're on my land. For now." Carlyle spat into the dust. but that's what we're here to discuss. Serafina pressed closer to the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd seen this dance before. The careful politeness that masked threats, the way predators circled before they struck. "Bank sent us," one of the mounted men said. "You're 4 months behind now. Time to pay up or move out." "I've got until the end of the month," Talon replied. "Contract says so." Carlyle smiled, and it was the kind of expression that never reached the eyes. Contracts can be interpreted, especially when the bank's got concerns about the property's condition. "Property's fine, is it?" Carlyle gestured toward the leaning barn, the patched fence. "Looks to me like a man who can't keep. His place up probably can't keep up with his payments either." Serafina's hands clenched into fists. She'd watched her second husband crumble under this same kind of pressure, the slow, deliberate erosion of hope until a man had nothing left to fight with. "What do you want, Carlyle?" Talon's voice remained steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Simple. You sign over the deed now, and we'll give you enough to start fresh somewhere else. Refuse, and when we come back at month's end, you'll leave with nothing but the clothes on your back." "And my wife?" Carlyle's gaze shifted to the house, and Serafina instinctively stepped back from the window. "Pretty little thing, from what I hear. Young woman like that, she'd do fine in town. Lots of opportunities for a woman willing to work." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Serafina felt her stomach clench with familiar dread. Even here, even married, she was still seen as something to be traded, used, discarded when convenient. But then Talon spoke, and his voice carried a cold fury she'd never heard before. "You'll address my wife with respect, or you'll leave my land with fewer teeth than you came with." Now, Greaves, no need to get hostile. I'm just pointing out facts. Woman's got to eat, and if you can't provide, I can provide. Can you? Carlyle pulled a folded paper from his coat. "See, we did some checking. Seems your new bride's got quite a history. Been married before, more than once. Makes a man wonder what kind of woman needs so many husbands." Serafina's blood turned to ice. They knew. Somehow, they knew about the sales, about the way she'd been passed from man to man like a piece of livestock. Talon's knuckles went white on the rifle stock. "My wife's past is none of your concern." "Maybe not, but it is interesting how she showed up right when you needed money most. Makes a fellow wonder if maybe she brought some assets with her." "Hidden assets? You're talking nonsense." But Carlyle smiled wider. "Am I? See, there's stories about the Duskmore family. Old stories about treasure hidden when the war ended. Confederate gold, some say. Others claim it was silver from the mines back east. Makes a man curious about what a Duskmore daughter might know." The world tilted sideways. Serafina gripped the windowsill as memories crashed over her, her grandfather's deathbed ramblings about something buried beneath the rose garden, her father's desperate questions in the weeks before he'd sold her the first time. "Get off my land," Talon said. "We'll go," Carlyle agreed, swinging back into his saddle. "But we'll be back. And next time, we'll want to have a conversation with your wife too. Woman might remember things that could help everyone involved." They rode away in a cloud of dust and implied threats, leaving Talon standing alone in the yard. Serafina watched him for a long moment. The way his shoulders sagged once the riders were gone. The careful way he propped the rifle against the porch post. When she opened the door, he looked up at her with eyes full of questions he was too polite to ask. "They're right," she said quietly. "About what?" "The stories. My grandfather. He used to talk about something hidden. I always thought it was just the ramblings of an old man who'd lived through too much loss." Talon climbed the porch steps slowly. "And now I'm wondering if maybe the old man wasn't as addled as we thought." They stood facing each other in the morning light, and Serafina realized that everything had changed again. She wasn't just a woman seeking shelter anymore, and he wasn't just a man needing help with his ranch. "If there's something buried here," she said, "if my grandfather really did hide something on Duskmore land before he died, it would explain a lot. Like why your father was so eager to marry you off. Like why every man who's owned me has ended up dead or broken." The words hung between them like a challenge. Talon studied her face, and she wondered what he saw there. Hope or fear, salvation or damnation. "Serafina," he said finally, "what aren't you telling me?" But before she could answer, a new sound reached them, the distant rumble of thunder. Though the sky was cloudless blue, they both looked toward the horizon, where another dust cloud was rising. More riders. And these were coming faster. The second group of riders wasn't from the bank. Serafina knew at the moment she saw how they moved. 3 men in dark coats riding hard with the desperate urgency of hunters closing on wounded prey. Her blood recognized the rhythm of pursuit even before her mind could process what it meant. Inside, Talon said, but she was already moving, her body remembering lessons learned in blood and fear. "They're not here for the ranch," she said, grabbing the kitchen knife from the counter. "They're here for me." Through the window, she watched the riders approach with military precision. The leader was a lean man with silver hair and dead eyes, the kind of man who killed as easily as breathing. She'd seen his type before, in the shadows around her father's gambling halls and her first husband's business dealings. Serafina Duskmore. The silver-haired man called when they were still 50 yards out. "We know you're in there. Come out peaceful, and nobody needs to get hurt." Talon moved to the window beside her, his rifle ready. "Friends of yours?" "My father sold information. Along with daughters," she whispered. "Told them about the treasure stories before he died. They've been hunting the Duskmore legacy for years." "How many years?" "Since before my first marriage." "They're the reason," her voice caught. "They're the reason my husbands kept dying. Anyone who got close to me became a target." Understanding dawned in Talon's eyes, followed by something that looked like fury. "They killed them. The first one was shot trying to protect me. The second drank himself to death because he knew they were coming." She gripped the knife handle until her knuckles went white. "I won't let them take you too." "They won't." The certainty in his voice made her look at him. There was no fear in his face, only a calm determination that reminded her of still water before a storm. "Mrs. Greaves," the silver-haired man called again, using her married name like an insult. "Your grandfather left quite a legacy. We'd like to discuss it with you." "What do they want?" Talon asked. "Same thing everyone wants. Confederate gold, supposedly buried somewhere on the old Duskmore property. My grandfather was an officer, retreated through Georgia in '64. Stories say he buried a payroll wagon somewhere safe. And you know where." Serafina closed her eyes, remembering her grandfather's fevered last words. "Beneath the roses where your grandmother sleeps, child. Where love blooms eternal. The earth remembers what we buried in sorrow." "Maybe," she whispered. The gunshots split the morning air and would splintered from the doorframe. "Time's up, Mrs. Greaves. Come out, or we come in." Talon moved with surprising speed, positioning himself at the front window while gesturing for her to take the back. "How many ways into this house?" "Front door, back door, 2 windows down here. Cellar entrance outside." "Can you shoot?" She almost laughed. "Better than most men." Another shot, this one shattering the kitchen window. Glass rained down on the floor where she'd made bread that morning, where she'd begun to imagine a different kind of life. "Listen," Talon said, his voice urgent. "There's a root cellar under the kitchen. Trapdoors hidden under the rug by the stove. You get down there, follow the tunnel. It comes out near the creek." "What tunnel?" Molly was scared of Indian raids. "Made me dig an escape route." His jaw tightened. "I'll hold them here." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "I won't run anymore. Won't leave another good man to die for my family's ghosts." "Serafina, the roses," she said suddenly. "Talon, where did Molly plant her roses?" "What? You said her lavender. Keeps coming back. Where are her roses?" His eyes widened as understanding struck. "The family plot. There's a small cemetery on the hill behind the barn. She planted roses over the graves. Where love blooms eternal, the earth remembers." "That's it," Serafina breathed. "That's where he buried it. Not on Duskmore land, here. My grandfather knew your family. He buried the gold here and told my grandmother, who told my mother, who died before she could tell anyone else." The front door exploded inward under the force of a boot. The silver-haired man stepped through, gun drawn, his companions flanking him. Well, he said, taking in the scene, Talon with his rifle, Serafina with her kitchen knife. "Cozy little domestic scene. Hate to interrupt, but we have business to discuss." "Only business I have with you is showing you off my land," Talon said. The man smiled. "Your land? For how much longer? Heard you've got bank troubles." "Amazing how Problems multiply when you're involved with a Duskmore woman. Leave him out of this, Seraphina said. It's me you want. Smart girl. Yes, it's you we want. And what you know about dear old Grandpappy's buried treasure. She stepped forward, and Talon moved to intercept her. Their eyes met for a moment, and she saw the same careful tenderness that had marked every interaction between them. This quiet man who'd promised never to sell her, who'd given her his dead wife's room and asked for nothing in return. If I tell you, she said to the gunman, you'll leave him alone. Seraphina, don't. If I tell you where the gold is buried, you'll ride away and never come back. The silver-haired man laughed. Oh, sweetheart, you still don't understand. We're not leaving any witnesses. Too much money involved for loose ends. The words hit her like a physical blow. Of course, she'd been naive to think otherwise. These men had killed her husbands not just to remove obstacles, but to ensure silence. But, the man continued, if you cooperate, we might make it quick. Painless, even. That's when Talon moved. He dove sideways, taking Seraphina with him as his rifle spoke twice in rapid succession. The crash of gunfire filled the small kitchen, deafening in the enclosed space. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and men shouted in pain and rage. When the echoes faded, two of the intruders lay still on her kitchen floor. The silver-haired man had taken cover behind the overturned table, blood seeping from his shoulder. You just made this a lot harder than it needed to be, he snarled. But Seraphina was looking at Talon, at the spreading red stain on his shirt where a bullet had found its mark. He was still conscious, still gripping his rifle, but his breathing was shallow and his face had gone pale. The tunnel, he whispered. Go. Not without you. The silver-haired man raised his gun, and Seraphina knew with crystalline clarity that this was the moment, the choice that would define not just her survival, but what kind of woman she chose to be. She could run, as she always had. Or she could fight for the first time in her life for something that mattered. Her hand found the kerosene lamp on the counter. You want to know about Duskmore gold? She called to the gunman. I'll tell you exactly where it's buried. But as she spoke, her other hand was already moving. And the question burning in her mind wasn't about treasure or survival. It was whether love really could bloom in ground watered with blood. The kerosene lamp shattered against the wall in a burst of flame and fury. Fire raced across the spilled oil like a living thing, hungry and bright in the dim kitchen. The silver-haired man cursed and scrambled backward, his coat sleeve catching fire as he tried to escape the spreading blaze. Now, Seraphina hauled Talon to his feet, his weight heavy against her side. Blood soaked through his shirt, but his eyes were clear and determined. They stumbled through the back door as smoke began to fill the house behind them. The gunmen's shouts followed them into the morning air, along with the crackle of flames finding purchase in dry wood. The cemetery, Talon gasped, pointing up the hill. If you're right about the gold, can you make it? Do I have a choice? They climbed through knee-high grass and scattered wildflowers, Talon leaning heavily on her shoulder. Behind them, smoke poured from the kitchen windows. She could hear the silver-haired man shouting orders, probably to his remaining accomplice. They'd follow soon enough. The family cemetery was small, just 6 graves marked with weathered stones and bordered by a low stone wall. And there, growing wild and beautiful over the oldest grave, were Molly's roses. Pink blooms heavy with morning dew, their roots deep in soil that had been turned decades ago. Sarah Greaves, Seraphina read from the headstone. 1823 to 1847. Beloved wife and mother. Talon's grandmother, he said through gritted teeth. Died when his father was just a boy. Seraphina knelt beside the rose bush, her hands finding the soft earth beneath. My grandfather mentioned a Sarah in his letters. Said she was the kindest woman he'd ever met. Took him in when he was wounded and running. Her fingers dug into the soil, searching. The roses had grown thick here, their roots creating a natural barrier that would have protected whatever lay beneath. 6 inches down, her knuckles scraped against something hard. There, she breathed. The sound of approaching footsteps made them both look up. The silver-haired man emerged from the smoke below, his coat scorched and his face twisted with rage. He was alone now. The fire must have claimed his companion. Clever girl, he called, starting up the hill. But you just trapped yourself. Nowhere to run now. Serafina's fingers closed around a small metal box buried among the rose roots. Not gold, something else entirely. She pulled it free and wiped away the dirt with trembling hands. Inside was a folded letter and a small velvet pouch. "What is it?" Talon asked. She opened the letter with shaking fingers, scanning the faded ink. Her grandfather's careful handwriting told a story she'd never known, about a young Confederate officer who'd met a Union widow tending wounded soldiers, about a love that transcended the war, tearing their country apart, about gold, yes, but not Confederate payroll. "It's a wedding ring," she whispered, opening the velvet pouch. "My grandmother's ring. The one she wore before she married my grandfather. I don't understand. There is no treasure." Serafina looked up at him, tears blurring her vision. "The gold everyone's been hunting, the fortune that got my husband's killed, it never existed. My grandfather buried love letters and a wedding ring. That's all." The silver-haired man was closer now, his gun drawn. "Hand it over. You killed 3 good men for this." Serafina held up the simple gold band. "For a woman's wedding ring and some love letters." She saw the moment understanding hit him. The way his face went from determined to furious to something that looked almost like disbelief. "That's impossible. The stories were about love, not gold." She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all these years. "My grandfather buried his heart in this ground, with a woman who showed him kindness when the world was burning down around them." The gunman raised his weapon, and Serafina knew she had moments left. But instead of fear, she felt something else, a strange, fierce peace. She'd spent her whole life being traded and sold, but in the end, she'd chosen to stand and fight for a quiet man who'd promised never to sell her. That's when the shot rang out. But it wasn't the silver-haired man who fired. Talon had found strength. From somewhere, raised his rifle one last time despite the blood loss and pain. The gunman crumpled to the ground among the wildflowers. His threat ended at last. "Is it over?" Serafina asked. Talon nodded, then swayed on his feet. She caught him as he fell, easing him down among the roses. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes were clear. "The house?" he asked. She looked down the hill. The kitchen was gone, but the fire had contained itself there. The rest of the house stood intact, waiting for them to come home. "It'll need work," she said, "but houses can be rebuilt. And us." Serafina looked at the ring on her finger, then at the man who'd fought beside her instead of running. "I've been sold 4 times," she said quietly. "But I've never been given a choice before. Never been asked what I wanted. What do you want?" She leaned down and kissed him, gentle as morning light. "I want to plant a garden. I want to fix the roof and mend the fences. I want to learn your horses' names and make bread in a kitchen that smells like home. And I want to choose you. Every day, for the rest of our lives." They sat among the roses as the sun climbed higher. 2 people who'd found something more valuable than gold in the most unlikely place. The treasure had been there all along, not buried in the ground, but growing in the space between 2 wounded hearts learning to trust again. 3 months later, when the mortgage was paid off with money from the reward for the silver-haired man's capture, Serafina planted new roses over the disturbed earth. Pink ones for Sarah Greaves, white ones for Molly, and red ones for herself. A woman who'd finally learned the difference between being sold and being chosen. If this tale of love found in the ashes has stirred your heart, do share it with a neighbor who might need reminding that the best treasures can't be bought or sold. And do tell us in the comments, what would you have buried in that rose garden?